On July 31st, 1946, the Hungarian National Bank printed a banknote worth 100 quintillion pengő. That number has 20 zeros. It was the largest denomination ever issued in human history. 3 weeks earlier, the same note could have purchased a house in Budapest. By August, it couldn't buy a box of matches. A jewelry merchant named László had converted his entire savings to gold coins before the collapse began. He believed he was prepared. When the hyperinflation peaked, he approached a farmer outside the city with 3 gold coins, worth more than most Hungarians earned in a lifetime. The farmer examined the coins. Then he shook his head. He wanted seeds. He wanted tools. He wanted labor for the harvest. László's family survived that winter, but not because of gold. Every expert tells you to buy gold before the collapse. What if that advice is designed for a crisis that no longer exists? Gold crossed $2,400 per ounce in April 2024, then $2,500, then $2,700. By early 2025, it had shattered every record in its 5,000-year history as a store of value. The financial media celebrated. The newsletters declared vindication. The preppers nodded knowingly. And central banks, the institutions that print the money everyone else uses, were buying more gold than at any point since 1967. China accumulated reserves for 18 consecutive months. Poland doubled its holdings. India, Turkey, Singapore, Kazakhstan, all racing to convert paper into metal. The message seemed clear. The smart money is buying gold. You should too. This message is everywhere. Every investment podcast, every financial survival guide, every YouTube video warning about the coming collapse. Gold is ancient. Gold is proven. Gold is the ultimate hedge. But here is what the gold sellers don't mention. Warren Buffett, the most successful investor in modern history, holds 0 gold. Not a reduced position. 0. Instead, Berkshire Hathaway sits on $325 billion in cash and treasury bills, the largest cash position the company has ever held. When asked about gold, Buffett's response has never wavered. Gold gets dug out of the ground, we melt it down, dig another hole, bury it again, and pay people to stand around guarding it. It has no utility. Anyone watching from Mars would be scratching their head. Buffett isn't buying gold. He's buying time. He's waiting for productive assets to become cheap so he can acquire businesses that employ people, generate cash flow, and create actual value. Ray Dalio, founder of the world's largest hedge fund, does recommend gold, but with caveats that the financial media consistently ignores. Dalio emphasizes diversification across asset classes. He stresses productive assets. He talks about storeholds of wealth with intrinsic value. Gold, in Dalio's complete framework, is one component, not the foundation, not the primary hedge, one piece among many. But buy gold fits in a headline. Develop productive capacity, acquire practical skills, build community networks, store essential goods, and allocate some portion to precious metals does not. So the media extracts the simple message. The gold dealers amplify it. The affiliate commissions flow. And millions of people prepare for the wrong crisis. Here is the distinction that changes everything. Gold works in financial crises, recessions, market corrections, currency devaluations where institutions continue functioning, and supply chains remain intact. Gold fails in civilizational crises, sieges, hyperinflations that destroy social trust. Systemic collapses where governments fall, borders close, and the infrastructure that assigns value to gold ceases to exist. In a financial crisis, you can sell gold at a coin shop. You can deposit it at a bank. You can trade it for currency that still purchases goods at stores that still have inventory. In a civilizational crisis, coin shops are closed, banks are frozen, currency is worthless, stores are empty, and gold becomes what it physically is, a soft yellow metal that you cannot eat, cannot plant, cannot burn for warmth, cannot use to treat a wound or defend your family. The central banks buying gold today are not preparing for civilizational crisis. They have armies to guard their vaults. They have first access to food and fuel. They have secure transportation to safe locations. You have none of that. So the critical question becomes, which crisis are you actually preparing for? Because if you're stacking gold coins for a civilizational collapse, If you believe the system itself might fail, not just wobble, then history has documented repeatedly and brutally that you're holding the wrong asset. There is an asset class that has survived every collapse in recorded history, every siege, every hyperinflation, every revolution, every war. It's not gold. And the evidence begins with understanding why governments have always, eventually, come for the gold, and what they never managed to take. The knock came at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in May 1933. Federal agents stood at the door of a Chicago dentist named Frederick Barber Campbell. They had a warrant. Campbell had failed to surrender his gold coins by the deadline set in Executive Order 6102, signed by President Franklin Roosevelt 7 weeks earlier. Campbell owned over 5,000 ounces of gold. He believed, as many Americans believed, that private property was protected by the Constitution. He was wrong. The government seized his gold. Campbell was prosecuted. The case went to court, where judges ruled that in times of national emergency, the government's authority superseded individual property rights. Every American citizen had been ordered to surrender gold coins, gold bullion, and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve by May 1st, 1933. The penalty for non-compliance: 10 years in federal prison and a $10,000 fine. The government paid $67 per ounce. Then after the gold was collected, Roosevelt revalued it to $35 per ounce. Overnight, every dollar held by Americans lost 41% of its purchasing power relative to gold. The citizens who surrendered their metal watched the government profit from their compliance. This was not a foreign dictatorship. This was the United States. This was 92 years ago, and it was not an isolated event. 2 years before Roosevelt's order, Britain had already abandoned the gold standard. In September 1931, the pound sterling, the world's dominant reserve currency for over a century, was severed from gold. British citizens who held metal found themselves subject to new restrictions, new oversight, new limitations on what they could do with their own property. The empire that had ruled global finance announced without warning that the rules had changed. 40 years later, on August 15, 1971, Richard Nixon changed them again. The Nixon shock ended the convertibility of dollars to gold for foreign governments. The Bretton Woods system, the post-war agreement that had anchored global currencies to dollar and dollars to gold, was dead. Nixon announced the change on a Sunday evening when markets were closed to prevent immediate panic. Gold owners believed this would make their holdings more valuable. In the long term, they were partially right, but they missed the deeper pattern. Every one of these events, 1931, 1933, 1971, revealed the same truth. Gold is only yours until the government decides otherwise. In 2013, Germany learned this lesson in a different form. The Bundesbank announced it would repatriate 674 tons of gold stored in vaults in New York and Paris. German gold held in Allied nations for safekeeping since the Cold War. The original timeline projected completion by 2020. But when the repatriation began, delays emerged. The New York Federal Reserve delivered only 5 tons in the first year. Logistical complications, they explained. The process took years longer than planned. If a sovereign nation with the world's fourth largest economy struggles to retrieve its own gold from Allied vaults, what happens to your gold when the next crisis arrives? The gold industry's answer is always the same. This time is different. They won't confiscate again. But confiscation is only one failure mode. The deeper failure, the one that truly exposes gold's weakness as a collapse hedge, is what happens when you try to use gold in a society that has stopped functioning. When bread matters more than metal. When farmers refuse to trade. When the infrastructure that prices gold and exchanges gold and validates gold simply ceases to exist. That failure has been documented across 5 collapses on 5 continents, spanning 100 years. In the autumn of 1923, a German school teacher named Anna Eisenmenger filled 17 pages of her diary with a single week's observations. The entry for November 12th recorded that her monthly pension, deposited that morning, could not purchase a single loaf of bread by afternoon. Anna had gold, a brooch from her mother, A ring from her wedding day. She walked to a bakery in central Berlin and offered the ring for food. The baker examined it, weighed it, and refused. Gold required verification. Gold required trust. Gold required a functioning system to assign it value. In the chaos of Weimar hyperinflation, trust had collapsed alongside the mark. The baker wanted eggs, flour, firewood, anything with immediate utility. Anna's ring returned home with her. This is the first collapse. The second struck Argentina in December 2001. President Fernando de la Rúa announced the Corralito, an immediate freeze on all bank accounts. Citizens could withdraw no more than 250 pesos per week. Savings accounts, checking accounts, safety deposit boxes, all locked. Gold owners discovered a brutal irony. Their metal was trapped inside the frozen banks. The safe deposit boxes that were supposed to protect their wealth had become prisons for it. Those who kept gold at home faced different problems. Street crime exploded as economic desperation spread. Holding physical gold meant advertising yourself as a target. The peso collapsed. Gold retained theoretical value. But theoretical value means nothing when you cannot access your metal or safely trade it. The third collapse unfolded in Venezuela, beginning around 2014. Inflation exceeded 1,000,000% by 2018. The bolivar became toilet paper. Literally, as Venezuelans discovered, toilet paper cost more than the currency it would take to buy it. Gold should have been the solution. Venezuela has gold reserves, citizens own jewelry, coins, small bars purchased during stable times. But medicine vanished from pharmacies. Food disappeared from stores. The black market priced everything in dollars or barter goods, not gold. A nurse in Caracas described trading her grandmother's gold necklace for a 3-week supply of blood pressure medication. The buyer paid a fraction of spot price because he understood her desperation. In a collapse, gold doesn't trade at market value. It trades at survival value. And survival value is set by the buyer, not the seller. The fourth collapse consumed Lebanon starting in 2019. Banks froze accounts without warning or explanation. The Lebanese pound lost 98% of its value within 18 months. Citizens who had stored gold in bank vaults could not access it. Citizens who had stored gold at home faced a different calculation. A Beirut businessman explained the mathematics of fear. The people who buy gold during a collapse are criminals. They know you're desperate. They name the price or they take the gold and leave you nothing. Who were you reported to? The police haven't been paid in 6 months. Gold in Lebanon became a liability. A beacon marking former wealth to people who had lost everything. The fifth collapse tore through Zimbabwe beginning in 2007. Inflation reached 79.6 billion% in November 2008, a number so large it lost meaning. Currency printed in the morning was worthless by sunset. The Zimbabwean government responded by making private gold ownership effectively criminal. Mining operations were nationalized. Citizens caught trading gold faced imprisonment. The regime understood what gold enthusiasts refused to accept. Gold is only portable wealth if you can move it across borders controlled by people who will let you keep it. Zimbabwe's borders were controlled by soldiers who would gladly confiscate anything valuable. 5 collapses, 5 continents, 5 political systems, 5 currencies, 5 identical outcomes. Gold failed not because it lost its theoretical value, but because theoretical value becomes meaningless when systems collapse. In a functioning economy, gold can be sold, deposited, exchanged, used as collateral. In a collapsed economy, those mechanisms vanish. The survivors weren't the ones with the most gold. The survivors were the ones who had what gold could never provide. Between 1845 and 1852, Ireland lost 1/4 of its population. 1 million dead from starvation and disease. 1 million more fled on coffin ships to America. But the death was not distributed evenly. In County Mayo, mortality rates exceeded 60% in some parishes. In County Wexford, they stayed below 15%. The survivors were not wealthier. They were not luckier. They were not better connected to political power. They had land. Families with even a 1/4 acre, enough for potatoes and a few chickens, survived. Families without land, the cartiers and laborers who depended on wages and purchased food, died in ditches with green-stained mouths from eating grass. The asset that survived the Irish famine was not gold. It was productive capacity, dirt that could grow food. This pattern repeated 90 years later, 12,000 kilometers away. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, the economy was rubble. Factories bombed, infrastructure shattered, currency worthless. Inflation would exceed 5,000% by 1949. Urban populations faced starvation. But certain people rebuilt faster than others. A Tokyo carpenter named Takeshi Yamamoto documented his experience in letters to his brother. For the first 2 years after surrender, he never touched money. He repaired roofs in exchange for rice. He built furniture in exchange for fish and vegetables. His skills were his currency. Portable, valuable, impossible to confiscate. By 1950, Yamamoto employed 3 apprentices. His neighbors, who had held cash and bonds, were still struggling. Inflation had erased their savings. His skills had compounded. The asset that survived Japan's collapse was not gold. It was capability. Cuba proved the pattern again during the special period. When the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, Cuba lost 80% of its imports overnight. Oil shipments stopped. Food imports vanished. The average Cuban lost 20 pounds in the first 3 years. Yet mortality rates didn't spike the way economists predicted. The reason was counterintuitive: community networks. Community. Neighborhood organizations, originally created for political purposes, pivoted to survival coordination. Families with backyard gardens shared with families without. Mechanics fixed bicycles in exchange for medical consultations. Elderly residents who remembered traditional food preservation taught young people who had never needed those skills. Isolated families suffered. Connected families adapted. The asset that survived Cuba's collapse was not gold. It was social infrastructure. And in Russia, after the Soviet system imploded, a parallel economy emerged that revealed exactly what humans value when official systems fail. The barter networks of 1991-1993 Russia operated on cigarettes, vodka, soap, batteries, and medicine. A pack of Marlboros purchased a week of groceries. A bar of imported soap traded for a month of building maintenance, paid to superintendents who hadn't received salaries in months. Pensioners who had saved rubles watched their lifetime of savings evaporate. Workers who had stockpiled practical goods, mocked as hoarders during stable times, became the wealthiest people in their communities. A Russian economist who survived this period summarized it precisely. Money is a social agreement. When society breaks, the agreement breaks. What remains is what you can hold, what you can use, and what you can do. The data from 2008 confirms this pattern in modern terms. When the financial crisis struck, the S&P 500 fell 46% from peak to trough. Gold gyrated, initially dropping as investors liquidated everything, then recovering. But farmland, productive American farmland, rose 17% during the same period. The volatility numbers are even more revealing. From 1992 to 2020, farmland's average volatility measured 6.84%. Gold's volatility measured 14.8%. The stable hedge was more than twice as volatile as dirt that grows corn. 4 collapses, 4 survival patterns, 1 consistent conclusion. Land beats gold, skills beat savings, community beats isolation, utility beats theory. The question is no longer what survived, the question is how to build it. On August 4, 1972, Idi Amin announced that Uganda's Asian population had 90 days to leave the country. 60,000 people, families who had lived there for generations, had 3 months to abandon everything they had built. They could carry what they could hold, nothing more. The wealthiest Asians, those with gold bars and jewelry, faced immediate problems at the borders. Soldiers searched luggage. Gold was confiscated. Those who successfully hid coins in clothing arrived in Britain and Canada with metal but no infrastructure to convert it. Banks demanded documentation. Buyers demanded discounts. The gold that was supposed to guarantee their future became an obstacle to rebuilding it. But the doctors found work within months. The engineers secured positions. The mechanics opened repair shops. The teachers found classrooms. Skills crossed borders. Gold did not. This is the first element of the framework that survives every collapse. Transferable skills. Not credentials, skills. A medical degree from Kampala might not transfer to London. but the ability to diagnose illness, suture wounds, and calm frightened patients transfers everywhere. A law license is jurisdiction specific. The ability to negotiate, analyze problems, and communicate clearly is universal. 7 years later, the Iranian Revolution produced identical results. Wealthy families fled Tehran with jewelry sewn into coat linings and gold coins hidden in shoes. Revolutionary guards at airports knew exactly where to search. Confiscation was routine. The Iranian doctors who reached Los Angeles rebuilt their practices within years. The engineers who reached Germany found employment within months. Their skills were recognized, valued, immediately applicable. Their relatives who had relied primarily on gold? Many spent years liquidating assets at desperate prices, struggling to restart in countries where their wealth meant nothing, and their capabilities meant everything. The second element is productive capacity. Land, if you can acquire it. Tools, regardless of whether you own land. Seeds, equipment. Anything that allows you to create value independent of employment, independent of currency, independent of institutions that may fail. During World War II, Swiss farmers experienced something their urban countrymen did not: absolute food security. The Swiss franc remained stable, one of history's rare examples of currency surviving a continental war. But even in Switzerland, city dwellers learned that currency stability meant nothing when supply chains fractured and rationing began. Farmers ate fully, city dwellers negotiated. The third element is stored necessities, not gold, goods, medical supplies with long shelf lives, tools that function without electricity, water purification, preserved food, batteries, antibiotics, soap. The Vietnamese boat people who fled between 1975 and 1995 learned this through tragedy. Gold was taken by pirates who intercepted boats in the South China Sea. Jewelry was stolen by corrupt officials at refugee camps. But a supply of antibiotics saved children dying of infection on overcrowded vessels. A fishing line meant food when supplies ran out. A water container meant survival when drifting for days. The fourth element is community. Not online networks, real relationships with real people possessing real capabilities, neighbors who would shelter you, friends who would share food when yours ran out, trust built over years, not transactions completed through screens. Isolated individuals face collapse alone. Connected communities distribute risk, share resources, coordinate defense, and multiply capabilities. The fifth element, only the fifth, is precious metals. Gold has a role. After the crisis stabilizes, after institutions begin functioning, after the survival period ends and a new economy emerges, gold can convert to whatever currency replaces the failed one. Gold can purchase assets at collapsed prices when stability returns. But gold is the capstone, not the foundation. The fifth element, not the first. The financial industry inverts this order because skills cannot be sold through advertisements. Community cannot be packaged and shipped. Productive capacity requires effort over years, not a single transaction. Gold can be sold with a click. Commissions can be collected. Newsletters can be renewed. So they sell you element 5 and never mention elements 1 through 4. In January 2025, the United States Treasury reported that interest payments on the national debt had exceeded $1.1 trillion for the fiscal year. For the first time in American history, the cost of servicing past borrowing surpassed the entire defense budget. The country now pays more to creditors than it spends on aircraft carriers, soldiers, missiles, and military operations combined. The national debt itself crossed $38 trillion, a number so vast it escapes comprehension. The Congressional Budget Office, a non-partisan agency whose sole purpose is honest fiscal analysis, projects that deficits will continue indefinitely, not for a few years, not until economic growth improves, indefinitely. Their models contain no realistic scenario in which America balances its budget without either unprecedented tax increases or spending cuts that no politician will survive proposing. This is not speculation. This is the government's own assessment of its own trajectory. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet tells the same story from a different angle. In 2008, before the financial crisis, the Fed held approximately $900 billion in assets. Today, that figure exceeds $7 trillion. The central bank has created more money in 17 years than it created in the previous 95 years of its existence. Where does this trajectory lead? Economists who study currency collapses have identified consistent stages. The progression is not random. It follows a pattern observable across dozens of failures over hundreds of years. Turkey currently demonstrates stage 3. President Erdogan insisted, against all established monetary theory, that high interest rates cause inflation rather than control it. He forced the central bank to cut rates while prices spiraled upward. The lira lost 44% of its value in 2021, another 30% in 2022. Citizens responded by fleeing the currency. Gold accounts at Turkish banks doubled as people sought any store of value outside the collapsing lira. The government responded as governments always respond. Controls, restrictions on dollar purchases, mandatory conversion of export earnings to lira, capital controls that trap wealth inside a deteriorating system. Stage 3 is characterized by loss of confidence and government intervention to prevent flight. Lebanon demonstrates stage 4, banks frozen, accounts inaccessible. The pound collapsed 98% within 18 months. Citizens cannot withdraw their own money. The middle class has been erased. Emigration has accelerated to levels not seen since the Civil War. Stage 4 is institutional failure, when the systems designed to protect wealth become the mechanisms that destroy it. Venezuela demonstrates stage 5, complete collapse, barter economy, currency functionally worthless, hospitals without medicine, stores without food, millions fled across borders with whatever they could carry. Stage 5 is societal breakdown, when economic failure becomes humanitarian catastrophe. And here is the fact that should disturb anyone paying attention. For the first time in recorded history, 100% of the world's major currencies are fiat. Not one is backed by gold, silver, or any physical commodity. This has never happened before in human civilization. Throughout history, when one currency collapsed, others remained stable because they were anchored to something tangible. There was always somewhere to flee, a stable currency, a functioning system. Today, every currency floats on the same foundation. Trust. Trust in governments. Trust in central banks. Trust in institutions. The entire global monetary system has become a circular reference. Dollars backed by treasury bonds. Treasury bonds valued in dollars. Confidence resting on confidence. When that trust breaks, and across 5,000 years of monetary history, it has always eventually broken. Where do you flee? In the winter of 1917, the Russian aristocracy faced a choice they did not recognize as a choice until it was too late. The Romanov dynasty had ruled for 3 centuries. The noble families orbiting the throne had accumulated wealth beyond imagination. Palaces, estates, art collections, and gold reserves stored in private vaults across Europe. When revolution stirred in the streets of St. Petersburg, most aristocrats dismissed it as temporary unrest. The Tsar's army would restore order. The peasants would return to their fields. The gold in their vaults would remain safe. They were catastrophically wrong. The nobles who read the signals early, who converted assets, secured passage, and fled before the borders sealed, survived. They arrived in Paris and London, with jewelry sewn into coat linings and coins hidden in luggage. They sold their gold at desperate prices to landlords who knew they had no leverage. Former countesses became seamstresses. Former princes drove taxis. Their gold bought survival, barely, in a world indifferent to their former titles. But they survived. The nobles who waited, who trusted that the chaos would pass, that their wealth made them untouchable, that surely this couldn't happen to them, died in cellars and prison camps. Their gold was confiscated. Their estates were seized. Their names were erased from history. They had held the hedge that was supposed to protect them, and it protected nothing. The difference between survival and extinction was not wealth. It was timing. It was the willingness to abandon what couldn't be saved and rebuild from capabilities alone. 24 years later, the siege of Leningrad taught the same lesson with even greater brutality. For 872 days, the German army encircled the city. Supply lines were severed. Food shipments stopped. By the winter of 1941-1942, the official ration had fallen to 125 grams of bread per day. Bread made partly from sawdust and cellulose because flour had run out. 1 million civilians died. Many starved in apartments surrounded by possessions that had once represented wealth, jewelry, art, furniture, gold. The survivors were not the wealthiest residents. They were the ones with access to food production, however minimal. Families who had maintained small gardens, workers at factories that received marginally better rations, people with skills the city desperately needed, medical workers, engineers, anyone who could keep essential systems functioning. A Leningrad doctor's diary recorded the calculus of survival. Gold bought nothing, rubles bought nothing. A jar of preserved vegetables bought another week of life. The ability to treat frostbite bought protection from those who could provide food. We survived on what we could do, not what we owned. This is the lesson that history delivers again and again to anyone willing to receive it. Wealth is not what you hold. Wealth is what you can do. Return now to Budapest, 1946. László Fekete stood before a farmer with 3 gold coins that represented his family's entire savings. The farmer examined them carefully, then refused. But László's family survived that year. His wife knew how to preserve food using methods her grandmother had taught her. His brother could repair machinery, a skill desperately needed as Hungary tried to rebuild shattered infrastructure. They traded labor and capability for sustenance. The gold coins sat in a drawer, waiting for stability to return. When stability finally came, when the forint replaced the worthless pengő, László sold the coins. He received a fraction of what they had been worth before the collapse. The buyers understood they were purchasing from desperation. If László could return to 1945 and convert those coins into tools, seeds, medical supplies, and skills training, he would make that trade without hesitation. He would build productive capacity instead of hoarding inert metal. He cannot go back. His lesson has been learned through suffering. Your lesson can be learned through observation. The warning signs are not hidden. They are published in treasury reports, documented in Federal Reserve balance sheets, visible in the daily headlines from Turkey and Lebanon and Argentina. The debt is unsustainable. The currency is unbacked. The institutions are fragile. Central banks are buying gold for themselves, for their own vaults, protected by their own armies. They are not buying it for you. They are printing money for you. The question is not whether instability is coming. The evidence suggests it is already here, advancing through the early stages that precede every major collapse. The question is whether you will prepare while preparation is still possible, or scramble when everyone else scrambles, and the resources needed to survive have already been claimed. Most people will do nothing. They always do. They will buy gold because it feels like preparation. They will stack coins in safes and feel secure. They will ignore the historical record because acknowledging it requires effort, change, and the abandonment of comfortable assumptions. They will learn what László learned, what the Russian aristocracy learned, what the residents of Leningrad learned, what every gold holder in every collapse has eventually learned. Metal is not wealth. Capability is wealth. The real hedge is not sitting in a vault. The real hedge is what you can grow when supply chains fail, what you can repair when systems break, what you can offer when currency means nothing, who will stand with you when standing alone means falling, skills, land, goods, community, and only then, only after the foundation is built, precious metals. That is the framework that has survived every collapse in recorded history. Gold is not the answer. Gold has never been the answer. Stop buying gold. Start building what survives.